Here's welcome to the C.S. Joseph Podcast, Premium Edition. This is episode 7 of the Social Skills lecture series that we've been doing. ENTP Social Skills Mastery. Because we all know I don't have social skills. Or at least I didn't have social skills for a long ass time until I finally figured out what those actually were, which, let's be honest, is entirely necessary. ENTPs, we have this problem when it comes to social skills, and a lot of people don't even realize just how socially inept we really are. So very socially inept. It's a serious problem. It's actually a huge problem, and I for one really resented actually being an ENTP for a long time after I finally accepted that I was an ENTP, because socially ENTPs by default, especially ENTP men, not so much on the women, because the women get away with it because it's excusable for female nature, because our optimistic functions as ENTP men are extrovert intuition hero and extroverted feeling child. So we come off like super feminine, especially in our youth. Basically, we just come off that way, very girly. I remember so many times where people like my brother-in-law would question my gender on a regular basis, right? Because that's what he would do. That's what your brother would do to people like me, because I would just come off super girly as a little kid, and it's just is ridiculous. And that's the thing about ENTPs socially, is that, especially ENTP men, but we the girls get away with it because that's just, they're supposed to come off that way. It's like it's pretty feminine for them, but for the males it's just like, wow, you're just cringe, just by default. You're cringe. You make people cringe just with your presence all the time. And I remember the day I stopped being cringe to people, and then I became intimidating. So either way, I ended up being an alienating or polarizing figure. It wasn't until I read Russell Brunson's book, Traffic Secrets, or .com Secrets, maybe even Expert Secrets, one of his first 3 books. And in those books, he talks about you have to make the AC, which is the attractive character from a marketing perspective. And how you do your AC is following a certain principle, which is the principle of polarity. You want to be as off-putting to people as possible, because when you are off-putting by people, it separates the men from the boys, essentially. The die-hard true fans, because all you need is 1,000 true fans, and you can make, like, you'll eat for the rest of your life if you have 1,000 true fans, basically, which is the argument that Dan Kennedy, a marketing guru, actually taught Russell Brunson, who is an ENTP, by the way. And sometimes he can come off really cringy, let's be honest. But because of that, and I think Russell Brunson's more of an SDUF ENTP, by the way. I think he's SDUF. I got a little bit of a depravity factor going on there for his SI inferior. But the point is that if you ever get out of your cringy social state as an ENTP, you have the intimidating social state just waiting for you. Like, I walk into a room, especially my favorite bars, and people just stop talking because I walked in. I mean, it literally happened to me tonight, and it happened to me any other time that I did it this week. Like, I walk in a room, people immediately just stop talking. It's almost as if they're waiting for me to speak, or they're trying to figure out what I'm doing. It's so weird. I've never had that kind of reverence from people in my life until I really figured out the intimidation factor. But I myself didn't even believe I came off intimidating at all. I had no clue. Someone else had to point that out to me, because that's how oblivious ENTPs are, especially ENTP men, because of extroverted sensing demon. We are oblivious as all hell, and because of that oblivion, or the obliviousness, is that we actually have a much harder time developing and crafting our social skills than most people, because in order to have social skill mastery, which is required in developing our parent function, it takes a very, very long time and a ton of investment in ourselves, and where we have to put in a lot of effort into something that we actually just on our own don't want to do. NTPs get hella stressed having to basically go to the lengths to doing any research, for example, or doing paperwork for that matter. It's really frustrating and kind of annoying. So it ends up becoming a bigger problem over and over and over again. And it's just like, and eventually, you as an ENTP just got to look at yourself in the mirror and realizing that you're just being fucking lazy and you need to get off your goddamn ass and actually fucking do some research and actually read some fucking books. Because that's the only way you're actually going to get anywhere in life is reading books. You know, Benjamin Franklin, and I learned that when I read the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin because I knew he was an ENTP. And his Benjamin Franklin's number one principle in his autobiography, the number one principle is he's trying to teach the reader is that, like, hey, read books. Read books. It's the most important thing you'll ever do in your life is read books, because by reading books and consuming them entirely, not just skimming through them, but actually having full commitment to reading a book from start to finish, that's the only way you as an ENTP are ever actually going to have any social skills or even any social mettle anywhere you go. Otherwise, you're just fucking worthless as an ENTP. You really are. And it's so interesting. This is actually a thing that I've noticed that INTJ women do when they're looking at ENTP men is like, oh, how they like the way that they qualify, you know, the men, etc., is like based on how much they have read. It's they're trying to figure out what knowledge is actually in that head because they don't even actually allow they don't actually allow from there. Well, yes, it's not a UD ENTP bias though. It's not. It is not. It is not because practice. You still have to have practice for reading because you can read poorly. You have to be practiced in reading. I think practice all around is like the main guiding principle for the ENTP because that's how we unlock our SI inferior because of extroverted sensing demon. Without extroverted sensing demon performance, I mean, you can perform poorly as a reader and not get anything out of it. Basically, I think practice is a far higher principle than reading books. You know, I think it's on a greater level for sure because I remember not being practiced at reading or practice at the English language and barely actually being able to comprehend what I was reading. I had to sharpen my reading comprehension. I had to practice reading comprehension, which was an extremely annoying thing to do over time. But I did it. And because of that, I was able to gain pretty good mastery over the English language, you know, such that like I was able to like type super quick. Because right now I can type as fast as I think, basically. I could think just slightly faster than I type, but even so, like it's able to keep up. So it's not really that big of a deal. So, but the point is that ENTP social skills are actually pretty difficult to develop. And now I'm not going to say that they have an easier time than other types, but it was hard. It was really, really hard. And there are people out there who still claim that I don't have social skills. For example, Fib has pointed out some social skill areas that I need to improve on a regular basis. Because it's like, he'll see me, like there's an example that we had one time where we went to like a barber shop. And he's like, oh, you just bring it all on yourself, don't you? You know, he's making fun of me for it and whatnot. And he's not wrong. He's not wrong. I absolutely do bring it on myself. But again, it's that AC Brunson concept of be as polarizing as possible, because the polarization in the long run is more important than being that social chameleon. Because being a social chameleon for the ENTP is actually far more alienating for people, and actually in the end far more intimidating for people to deal with than somebody who is socially polarizing. Because if an ENTP ends up being socially polarizing over time, people know that about you. It becomes part of your reputation. People know where you stand. Whereas if you're a social chameleon, being this socially people-pleasy ENTP who's not willing to be polarizing and whatnot, that's far scarier. That's far scarier because you're not revealing a position at all. And not revealing a position is actually an indicator of immature TI parent. Actually, not revealing a position, not revealing what you think, based on how you act or and whatnot. That's it's a thing. It's annoying. It can't be done. I mean, and then even Fib and I, like when we go out in public, sometimes we're total edge lords basically, and that's entirely on purpose. It's entirely on purpose. Wearing the sunglasses at night, or looking at girls who are staring at us and being like, "What's your problem?" etc. Like it's fun because like him and I, we just make a really great team. When we're out in public and we see that, and we're just like, "Well, what's your problem?" Or what, that's his classic line. "What's your problem?" Or "What are you looking at?" That kind of a thing. And it creates that polarization, right? And while polarization is intimidating at first, eventually it becomes part of your reputation. And then through that reputation, people actually can trust you because you're polarizing. It actually builds trust over time because they always know where you stand, and you stand in the position of polarization as an ENTP versus, from the other perspective, being that social chameleon, which ENTPs oftentimes end up having the worst rap for, the biggest problem against it, that they have faced within their lives. That too ends up becoming a big deal over time. So that's why it's important to just keep track of that. You can actually measure an ENTP's maturity actually as a person entirely based on whether or not they're willing to be polarizing in public, or if they would prefer to be social chameleons. Like, I'm going to do some call outs here, but in terms of like social chameleons, right? I've noticed that SDUF ENTPs are the ones who try to be as practiced in terms of being a social chameleon as much as possible. There are a few SDUF ENTPs on the Ego Hackers Discord server who exhibit that behavior all the time, and they really shouldn't. And if they would stop being social chameleons, it's at that point they can actually probably get into their subconscious focus, get some of that joy energy, because joy can actually, and hope, can be achieved through being socially polarizing. Whereas you're not really going to get that if you're being a social chameleon. Same thing goes with UDUF, but UDUF is actually taking it even further, like way too far. It's like it's more like they'll turn their polarization on and off in the moment based on whichever moment benefits them the most, basically, which can cause them to look inconsistent, right? It's inconsistent. So it's the same inconsistency that an SDUF ENTP would have. So, and that ends up scaring people. It ends up scaring people, and this is what's so off-putting about ENTPs. The most mature ENTPs out there are the ones who actually lean into the polarization, hands down. And so yeah, while this is the introduction to this particular lecture, I just wanted to make that abundantly clear. Being an ENTP myself, and living with another ENTP, and having the SDSF perspective present in my life, having the UDSF perspective present in my life, and then watching all the other ENTPs in the Ego Hacker community, it's just like, wow. The thing is, though, is that like leaning into polarity, social polarity, is scary to an SI inferior, and that's why they don't do it. That's really why they don't do it. Because like an SDUF ENTP man would be like, well, why would I want to do that with their NI nemesis, right? And a UDUF ENTP man, well, how can I be a good person if I'm polarizing, right? And that ends up becoming a problem. If I, because the UDUF ENTP cares more about how they look, when all ENTPs in the world should never give a flying fuck about how they come off. They really shouldn't. It's not their job. It's really not their job. Leave that to the SE inferiors, leave that to the SE parents, but it's not an ENTP's job to care about how they come off. And how they could stop caring about how they come off is literally based on their TI parent and how developed it is. Because if they know that they're walking in truth and telling the truth, they don't have to give a shit about how they're coming off, because no one is going to be able to disagree with them anyway. And there's nothing more painful to an ENTP than someone disagreeing with you when you know you're right. So why the fuck should you even care about spending so much mental energy on how you're coming off if you know you're correct, right? Which does tend to get ENTPs in trouble. But it also gets, like, for example, SE pessimistic men and women out there, for example, because they really hyper care about how they come off to others. It gets them in trouble because they oftentimes spend more time on how they look instead of actually what they're trying to say or what they're trying to do, which could actually harm their performance because they spend all their performance points on how they come off instead of actually what they're trying to perform. Like what is the actual outcome of what they're trying to achieve? Like that ends up becoming a problem for them. And like luckily, SE inferior can aspire and get out of that situation pretty well, but they do it in bursts basically. Whereas the SE parent's a little bit different. At least the SE parent can become super responsible from that perspective and kind of grow out of that situation, and then just have it turned on forever. Except for the point when their parent function is like, okay, well, I need a rest, and then that's just kind of how it is. So yeah, social skills really matter, but like this is the basis for ENTP's social skills success, basically. In light of the introduction of this particular lecture. That being said, we can now get into the main meat of the lecture. So, like I said, this is the fundamentals of social interactions for the 16 types. This is the ENTP episode. In all social interactions, regardless of social context, the instinct to achieve one's cognitive origin is always present. Cognitive origins, while typically unconscious, drives are the single most important piece of knowledge to use for skillful and dynamic social interaction. What is more important than knowing what you and others are seeking most out of life? There's also the sexual agenda that you have to concern yourself with when it comes to social interaction. The sexual agendas of hypergamy for women and polygyny for men, while more socially restricted in certain environments, like professional environments, they're also always present, and the sexual agenda can override both nature, compatibility, and nurture simultaneously. And with nature, camaraderie is also another component. Because remember, folks, how it works is that male sexuality is activated when he sees a beautiful woman, a woman who has mastered her own perception, basically. Her female perception has outward proof of her female perception based on her level of beauty, which tantalizes and arouses his sexuality, which then transfers to his nature, where he starts making decisions about the woman. And then those decisions lead to actions, right? And those actions are how he nurtures her with his octogram or through his octogram, which then impacts her octogram when she receives his actions, basically his gifts, and then what that does is that activates how he perceives her in her nature within one of whichever of the 16 natures she is. And then at that point, if it's favorable to her internal nature, then it opens up her sexuality. This is why it takes a long time for women to be sexually aroused over time, and they don't just jump into arousal right away. This is why I gave so much shit in the Ego Hacker Discord yesterday, calling her out for her bullshit cliches that she put forward in the sexuality sig. I gotta be real about that, because honestly, it's just entirely ridiculous that happened, and she doesn't even know what she's talking about, and it's because of this Ouroboros from a sexual perspective, from male sexuality to male nature to male nurture to female nurture to female nature to female sexuality. Sexuality is the last thing for them, where it's the first thing for men, right? That's how it works psychologically speaking, right? So it ends up becoming an issue over time. So then you have the extroverted octogram, which is an Ouroboros between nurture to nature to sexuality. Okay, we already discussed that. So many suffer socially due to the ignorance of other people's types, as well as their own type, let's be honest, and what others are seeking out of life, which is cognitive origins. And many suffer from the brainwashing of society or cognitive projection. And remember, cognitive projection is what I put is that we give unto others what we hope to receive from them. Basically, that is ultimately what cognitive projection is. We give what we are seeking from others. So because of this brainwashing, it blinds the realities of intersexual dynamics. Masculinity, femininity, and polarity are driving forces in all human interactions. And don't forget, folks, all human interaction is manipulation. All social interaction is manipulation. Manipulation is a neutral term, okay? Every communication that you send to another human being or receive is manipulation. Period. End of story. And to think otherwise is entirely ignorant. Individually becoming aware of our social blind spots, like our trickster and our demon, which those are our social blind spots, and leveraging our innate social gravitas, cognitive origin, your parent function, etc., is vital in cultivating social skills, trusted connections, and personal success. And when it comes to ENTPs, that is being polarizing, also known as being edgy, basically edgy. Russell Brunson talks about being edgy because you want to be edgy because when you have edges around you, it hooks onto other people and pulls them along with you. That's why you want to be edgy. Edgy is something every ENTP should aspire to be. One of the reasons why I wear black constantly, because I stick out like a sore thumb, right? Because I'm showing proof of my edge in a social situation. That edginess matters. Let's look at negative social perceptions of an ENTP. So the colloquial perception of ENTPs is that they are original, innovative, enduring, and visionary, but that they can also be rebellious, cold, and expect the same sharp fairness from you as they do from themselves, which can really blow up in their face. SI inferiors have this problem where they're really hard on themselves, and because they're hard on themselves, they naturally end up being hard on other people when they really shouldn't. Because it's like, hey, I can endure a lot of things. So they project that high level of endurance on other people, expecting other people to have the same endurance that they do, when that's actually wrong. And a huge social faux pas that ENTPs commit on a regular basis. I still commit that social faux pas on a regular basis myself without even realizing it until it's too late. It's one of my biggest hangups, but any ENTP would have that hangup. Not that it's an excuse, it's definitely an area to work on. So these perceptions naturally shift when nurture, gender, and octogram are accounted for. So the ENTP social faux pas come from two primary places. So by being logical in their vision and pushing their vision of the future by the ENTP, leading to feeling entitled to their own personal comfort, using their deadly sins to compensate for their inferior function. Where it's like, okay, yeah, my deadly sin of bitterness. It's like, why do those people get to be comfortable? What do they do to earn their comforts? What do they get to do to earn their fulfillment in their life? Like, I'm working a lot harder than they have, so why am I not reaping the rewards? And that's the thing. Like, I always talk about the rocking horse. SI inferior is like life is a rocking horse, and because of that, life being a rocking horse is like it's a lot of movement, but you're going nowhere. And that's the problem. Is like ENTPs due to FI Trickster, have no clue where to actually invest their effort. They really have no clue where to invest their effort. And I actually had to come to that harsh reality, that conclusion for myself earlier today, because I had a meeting with a gentleman that I'm about to hire to take over a lot of my marketing tasks that I, to be fair, don't really trust anyone else to do. And it's not that I find those people incapable. It's just that SI inferior, because of its comfort zone, it can actually end up becoming off a little too controlling at times. And ENTPs are at risk of being entirely too controlling as a result. And it's especially bad with unconscious focused ENTPs, because that level of that controlling nature, that pessimistic, paranoid, controlling nature, because they're paranoid to protect their SI inferior, they end up coming off way too controlling towards other people, and because of that, it ends up it's just another social faux pas. They end up destroying their relationships. So, and then being ignorant of how assuming their comfort is what makes everyone else comfortable, and oh my God, that's bad in ENTPs. It's also bad in ISFJs. They have that problem too, where it's like, they expect everyone to be just as comfortable with a certain something that they themselves are comfortable with, like organized religion, for example. And they expect everyone else to follow that perspective entirely. And it's crazy. I'm sure Fib will show up. I'm sure he'll show up eventually, or maybe he'll just stand next to the tree and start doing nunchucks again. Who knows? But yeah, that's ultimately another issue, because what makes the ENTP comfortable, what I've come to realize is that inferior functions ultimately are special snowflakes. They really are very unique functions. And just because something makes me comfortable does not mean it's going to make anyone else comfortable, but it's easy to assume it does because of extroverted sensing demon. And that means comfortable doing hard ass work, or a lot of it's just not gonna be a thing. So just something to be aware of as another issue. So though our extrovert intuition hero is our innate strength, the more pridefully we lean into our hero, the more blinded we become to our hero's insufficiency and our demon's reality. The more we feel entitled to our hero's glory, the more unintended damage the demon will do. This is ultimately what leads to ENTPs being presumptuous, which bites me in the ass so many times, far more in the ass than like I've noticed Fib, sometimes, presuming from time to time, but to be fair, to directly compare him and I actually presume far more than he does. And I think it's because my masculine primary function is TI, where it has, obviously a higher chance of success, but because of that, it also has a higher chance to fail, due to those extremes. And that too ends up becoming an issue over time that should be, carefully managed. So the more the ENTP assumes what is the best future, what is the best opportunity, the best outcome, and believes that everyone should desire the same vision as theirs, the more they damage themselves and others through deciding the ends justify the means, which is extroverted thinking critic plus extroverted sensing demon. And ENTPs, especially unconscious focused ones, really have a bad tendency of pushing their vision on other people and holding this impossibly high SI inferior expectation on other people who do not follow or buy into that vision. When the ENTP, and this is for, and UF ENTPs are the ones who have failed to admit to themselves that that vision can change as new information comes into their life in the moment, basically. And their prescience, their ability to predict the future literally can change in minutes. And they need to teach themselves through self-discipline with their SI inferior to become more self-aware of how their predictions can change in the moment as they're getting new information in the moment. But it's hard for them to do that because extroverted sensing demon is in the way. Extroverted thinking critic is inhibiting them from actually being able to listen. And that's very hard, especially when it comes to subconscious developed ENTPs. They really struggle with listening because they don't have as much access to their extroverted thinking. And that lack of listening can often cause them to come off pedantic. Actually, I knew a UDSF INFJ recently, and he's a great fellow, but he really struggled being around any other ENTP that basically wasn't me. He just could not handle it because he's like, I'm tired of how your type is just so pedantic all the time, or arguing over the stupidest, littlest semantical things that don't actually matter or have value. And I'm forced to be in this position to have to listen to it, even though I don't want to listen to it. And even though I typically listen to everyone, but it's always the same thing over and over and over again because I'm dealing with SI inferior and it just bothers the shit out of me. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I totally get that. So I actually had to be careful introducing ENTPs around this person for a while, and I still maintain I would have to be careful due to that issue entirely. So like ESTPs, ENTPs can be taken advantage of by the social divergent of who actively challenge and test social norms, because ENTPs got to experiment with everything in the same way ESTPs do with the rules. ENTPs experiment with like social norms and systems and whatnot and procedures. This is where the ENTP gets satisfaction only by assuming fulfillment for everyone is the same as what they already are comfortable with, making them a tyrant, basically. See Malcolm X, because let's be honest, Malcolm X literally actually was tyrannical, which is a very unpopular thing to say, but it's true. Adolf Hitler is another example. It's that tyrant, and ENTPs can definitely turn into tyrants. I'm often accused of being a tyrant in my own community. I have this emoji, which is : commissar : and it basically shows a dictator walking by someone he doesn't like and then pulls out a gun and shoots it in the head, basically. And I always use that emoji in public just before I'm about to ban them, as if to show that it's a public execution, essentially. And I've oftentimes been accused of being a tyrant when doing that. But the thing is that my perspective, the reason why I do it is if I'm working hard to fulfill other people's lives and I'm working hard to satisfy other people within my community with a lot of free information, a lot of free resources and whatnot, and they're going to disrespect me publicly, I have no tolerance for that. So yeah, I will shoot them in the head and they will be banned. Get out. You can't be in this community anymore. If that's how you're going to treat me after everything that I've already done for you, go fuck yourself. And I have that fuck you attitude everywhere I go. But it makes me look like a tyrant. But I don't care. I'm working hard to satisfy and fulfill and give you fulfillment in your life. You better fucking respect me. Which is basically the difference between cognitive origins of satisfaction and reference, basically. If I'm satisfying you, you owe me reverence. You better revere me if I'm satisfying you, basically. Or if I am working hard to revere you, you better satisfy me, essentially. And all ENTPs are that way, all of them. Even the UD-UF ones would not admit that, but it's true. Even them, it still is true because UF is still a temporary mind state. So ENTPs can use their logic to push outside of social norms in order to achieve their pursuit of happiness, with the assumption is the same pursuit of happiness for everyone else. Heart Temple, pursuit of happiness. We're the ones that actually start the process for the pursuit of happiness in the Heart Temple, just like the ESFPs do. But because we have extrovert intuition as our hero, it is actually the input. So we're the true starter of the Heart Temple in terms of the pursuit of happiness. The problem is that ENTPs oftentimes can get so arrogant that we actually believe that our definition of the pursuit of happiness is the same or should apply to everybody else, and that's not true. That's another example of an ENTP being a tyrant, basically, and that just destroys their social connections with other people. It's really dumb, and I used to do it all the time. And I was really forceful with extroverted sensing demon, and then I realized, you know what, people should just be given a choice, and if they choose to be ignorant, that's on them. And it took me a long time to get to that point. Learning Stoicism, especially Dokudo, according to Miyamoto Musashi, especially the very first principle of Dokudo, which is always accept everything for what it is, it became a cornerstone for me to actually develop the social skill to get out of that bullshit, right? So it got to the point where I'm just like, you know what? I need to have the principle of accepting everything as it is, including being accepting of other people's ignorance. And this is a huge pillar of ENTP social skills right there. Being accepting of other people being ignorant. It's extremely difficult for ENTPs, especially SD ENTPs. It's very, very hard for SD ENTPs to do that. And it's funny because the more malevolent an ENTP is with a lot of criticism in their life, that criticism actually exposes their own ignorance, and then they can actually project their own ignorance onto other people and be more accepting of other people being more ignorant than they are. This is an advantage a UD ENTP has over an SD ENTP, because SD ENTPs really have very little patience for the ignorance of others by comparison, which is really, really frustrating. The thing is, though, is that UDUF takes it even further, where they are accepting of people's ignorance, but then they hoard up all the valuable knowledge and develop principles out of that valuable knowledge for themselves and don't actually share it with other people. They really don't. And sometimes it looks like they're sharing, but they're really not sharing the most important things that they've discovered. They really and learned. They really don't. So that too ends up becoming a problem. Now UDSF seems like this hope energy variant, and I'm biased because I am UDSF when I say this, but this ends up becoming this thing where it's even further. So ENTPs who expose themselves to the opinions of others, right, and actually allow other people to be ignorant and utilize that variety to expand their sharp logic tend to be the most respected or revered. That's really a very important key. So when others want you only for being willing to bring them fulfillment, expert intuition plus expert feeling, it can be a sign that others are taking advantage of you, the ENTP. Be careful when people value you only because of what the choices you offer them based on your own personal experience. This goes for all crusaders, to be fair. Quality people tend to invest in your duty, comfort, and respect your life experience as a result of that. And that, too, is important. So the blind spots, like how does an ENTP cover their social blind spots, basically? So our primary blind spots are from the demon and the trickster functions. For the ENTP, their first major blind spot is the FI trickster. ENTPs can get themselves into big trouble by taking their trickster function, which is principles for success, too seriously. And this is UDUF ENTPs the most. They really struggle with this. They can also come through as, I only FI what other people value for me. You know, I only value what other people value for me, which opens the ENTP to being abused and used as a zealot for organized religion or corrupt belief systems or XYZ person or system. You know, it's basically their corrupt aspiration pull of fanaticism, basically. It's like a untested fanaticism, an unverified fanaticism, and ENTPs are especially weak to it, especially in their youth. And that's why oftentimes ENTPs, when you talk to them, they always have a story about how they got out of a cult or how they got out of a church or how they got out of an organized religion of some kind. You know, I recently was going to be making the decision to join an organized religion, and then I decided not to because certain questions couldn't be answered, and there's too many inconsistencies. So I decided to just further move forward and expand my knowledge, from that perspective, and try to take a more holistic approach to my personal belief system, and while simultaneously being accepting of everyone else's belief system from that perspective. That's kind of how I was able to get through that particular situation. So, and ENTP's big mistake is thinking that their easily adopted values are the truth when in fact they're not. FI Trickster may imagine what is right as a result of putting their faith in what is collectively desired by others. That's a big problem. The other blind spot of extroverted sensing demon is in failing to realize that their personal performance in life is paramount. Due to this failure, they start out in life as super cringe to other people when they end up being intimidating later. An obsession with their faith in a better future being the faith to follow makes ENTPs come off as being entitled to others following their example or their trends that they set because they know the way. This causes them to dismiss other people's beliefs entirely if it does not match their adopted faith. And this is where you end up having people like Malcolm X, essentially. And he was killed for it. He's literally killed for this bullet point due to extroverted sensing demon, which is rough, because they know the way, and this is like where you get like the ENTP with the prophet complex. Basically, they end up having that prophet complex, which is something I am regularly accused of, especially due to my use of biblical scripture as well as Quranic and Hadith related teachings in my work, or Abrahamic related belief systems. It's the same shit when it comes to dealing with that issue. So people are willing to adopt their faith and bring an ENTP fulfillment because they are interested, not just because of an ENTP's anecdotes are the fundamental truth. And oftentimes ENTPs will actually double down and maintain that their anecdotes are the absolute truth when it's not. I don't know how many times I've relied on anecdotes for arguments only for me to realize that I misremembered or I misjudged my own anecdotal experience. This is actually something that Fib has pointed out multiple times since living with me, actually, because he's called me out saying, "You misremembered that. You misremembered," and he's right. He's absolutely right in those situations. And his call outs have actually helped me sharpen where I'm at, in terms of making sure that I'm actually verifying my own anecdotal experience by seeking new experiences and trying to recreate the anecdotes that I've had previously to make sure that they are actually true and actually on point, when it comes to arguments, because ENTPs rely on anecdotal evidence primarily within their arguments for the most part. For the most part, they do. And the thing is that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And ENTPs oftentimes fall into this issue where they assume it is true. And that's why we have people like Fib in my life that correct me and show me otherwise, because that's entirely necessary. Without that, I'm at risk of being personally lost, and then it just ends up creating a situation where it's the blind leading the blind, right? And that's not something that I want in my life. That's not something I want for this community or this movement, right? It's a very humbling thing, and I have to admit that here, honestly. As I take full responsibility for my hangups, in these lectures that I do on ENTPs. It's also why I invest so much in Confessions of an ENTP as a stream, because I'm just trying to make sure that everybody knows how human I actually am, right? And that too is polarizing, and that too is edgy, because people are usually not interested in exposing their humanity. It's kind of like ISFPs and INTJs, introverted wayfarers. They benefit so much from exposing how human they are, because oftentimes they are some of the most human out of us, but they spend so much time trying to look human instead of actually being human, that they end up missing out on what it is to be human, right? And that ends up becoming a huge, huge issue. Whereas you look at ESTPs and INFJs, Soul Templars, and these types, they gain their identity through self-exposure. Actually, they gain their identity through it, which is also another fascinating point to think about, from a social perspective. So, um, let's move on. So, the cognitive origin of satisfaction, also known as fulfillment, can help the ENTP immensely by equipping them with life experience they need to properly ascertain the truth. But here's the thing, though, that's all good and whatnot, but you have to go further and you have to recreate similar life experiences or the same life experiences over and over again to make sure that your anecdotal evidence is actually true and make sure that it is on point. And this is one of the biggest, this is why this is what ISTPs do for me in my life, actually. Duggo does it. Even BM Christie does it to a degree, actually. These gentlemen in my life, they have this use to me for where they ask questions, validating questions, because they're trying to validate the anecdotes. And what this does is it forces me to keep adding additional information or confirming my anecdotal evidence before I start making arguments, basically, which continues or ensures continual experimentation of my own experience and further expands that experience due to the pressure of their extroverted sensing parent and the pressure of their TI hero from that perspective. This is why the ISTP is known as the supervisor type to the ENTP and vice versa. The ENTP does that for the perception of the ISTP, but the ISTP does that for the judgment of the ENTP and making sure that everything is on point, which is good. It's very necessary. So, what is the ENTP's highest social value? So, what are the social expectations for ENTPs? ENTPs are expected to be accurate in their predictions, provide freedom of choice and options to other people, be intelligent and extremely accurate. They often, as well as sincere, sincerity vice. They often are all these things, especially as children, much to their own detriment. Many ENTPs are rewarded for their innovation, and others, especially UD ENTPs, had to develop their own knowledge, often outside of traditional education. However, all ENTPs are rewarded through consistent practice, and that's when they're basically integrating their extroverted sensing demon through cognitive orbit into their introverted sensing inferior. Being right, in quotes, opens ENTPs to being presumptuous and thus alienating to other people, especially when they don't verify their anecdotes, which is really annoying, or even experiment with their anecdotes or experimenting with additional theories because they're very theoretical. So what do other people want socially from an ENTP? Do they want a great vision and path forward of your any hero? No. When ENTPs overindulge their any hero, they become overly stretched and wear themselves out and take others down with them, basically. There can be an implicit psychological violence wielded through taking on too many obligations. And as the ENTP ends up getting stressed out, they end up stressing out everyone around them in the process because they take on too many obligations. And that's all part of that need for control, need for protecting their own comfort zone through their SI inferior. That's where it comes from, and it's really annoying. And then that's when we have to actually humble ourselves to delegate. An ENTP who lacks humility is an ENTP who can't delegate, basically. Humility is a prerequisite to being able to delegate, because delegation is the same as also asking for help. And a lot of ENTPs out there, especially the unconscious focused ones, are not interested in asking for help. There's a UDUF ENTP that's close to me, and I have rarely ever seen him ask for help to the point where I actually have complete doubt in his ability to ask for help at all. And sometimes I have to force help down his throat, which would make sense because of his masculine primary function being introverted feeling, and introverted feeling likes to be helped and needs to be helped oftentimes. So it's kind of interesting just how that works, from a UDUF ENTP perspective. And the SDUF ones like to think of themselves as the trendsetters and the trailblazers, when the reality of the situation is they oftentimes don't even realize that they're digging their own graves, with the additional obligations they're taking on just to prove how much of a trendsetter or just to prove how much of a trailblazer they actually are. This is something that, like people in the ego hacker community like Joe need to actually figure out as soon as possible and avoid that behavior so they can actually get into subconscious focus, which is another big deal. So do people actually want to bother watch you conquer your fears, your SI inferior, and lean into strength and perseverance? Not really. Do they want to watch your extroverted feeling child play with the hearts of other people like playthings, if even spitefully? No. None of these things are the highest value that an ENTP can provide socially. But ENTPs oftentimes think that, oh, it's all about how caring I am. It's all about whether I'm a problem solver. It's all about whether I can give people options and seize every opportunity. Not unlike an ESFP who doesn't want to make a choice because as soon as they make a commitment to a choice, then they lose all the choices that they have in the moment and don't have enough faith to see additional choices coming in front of them. Well, so also the ENTP wants to grab at every opportunity and do every single opportunity, and ENTPs have a really hard time letting go of opportunities, and they need to humble themselves enough to let go of those opportunities, or at least ask for help and delegate those opportunities to other people so they can have a shared reward in those opportunities. That would be nice, but they often don't. They don't do that. So ENTPs, what do they want socially? Well, they're looking for someone to affirm their masculinity or femininity naturally, to affirm their nature, to be seen as reliable, strong, capable, and brilliant, and well practiced, to have confidence that their origin, primary or secondary, would be met by another person, essentially, or people in general. That's what ENTPs are looking to get out of it. People are more interested in how they can achieve their own origin and or what you can do for them, essentially, because remember, we're a solipsistic race in any social interaction. So the function best suited to contribute to other people is the parent function, right? So through the parent, though the parent can be introverted like an ENTJ's NI parent, the parent archetype is externally focused, just as a literal parent watches over their children or partner. Now, an immature TI parent puts effort only towards the pedantic, and basically spending all of their processing power and their ability to tell the truth and their sincerity on their self. They spend it on themselves, basically. And oftentimes, this is being dominated by their own thoughts at the expense of others, possibly leading them astray. So ask yourself as an ENTP what you are drawn to in the teachers, authors, actors, and friends that you are compelled by. So I believe that the parent function is what we are most drawn to in other people. It's a sign of responsibility, courage, selflessness, and competence. What are ENTPs valued for the most socially? It's sincerity and telling the honest truth, even if people don't want to hear it. Um, and uh, and it's such that where other people know that they can just come to you for brutal honesty. Uh, our primary social value add is dispelling delusion, basically. Dispelling delusion. The problem is, due to our FI trickster, we ourselves are at risk of becoming delusional if we become lazy in verifying our experiences, which SI inferiors oftentimes feel that is a burden to have to go into even additional effort to verify their anecdotal evidence, their SI, to see if it still rings true. And that too ends up becoming a huge problem over time. So the TI parent plus the expert thinking critic orbit mixes skill and consistency together. ENTPs can be extremely accurate and solve any problem because they practice critical thinking. And with sound research and experimentation together, people love when you tell them the sincere truth that is also provable. You see, like this community would have never have taken off if the season 3 playlist on the YouTube channel wasn't there, because people would watch those videos and be like, "Oh my God, he's talking about me. How does anyone know me at this level? Holy shit, this is actually real," because it's provable. It's actually provable, and I can say the sincere truth because it's provable. This is why I could shit on INFPs or shit on ENFPs, because I'm literally exposing them for what they actually do, right? And it's provable. And even if they themselves are in their FI delusion land about themselves, other people in their lives that would watch that video and bring that video to them could point the finger at them and be like, hey, you actually do behave this way. And that is actually very terrifying to them that they have been so easily exposed. Any FI parent or hero actually ends up oftentimes having that experience. The SFPs really have that experience too. So, anyway, uh, the more accuracy in problem solving and truth telling an ENFP gains, and the more they verify their anecdotal evidence and experience, the more through experimentation, the more their cognitive origin of satisfaction builds layers like rich soil of wisdom, strength, and inspiration within their lives. Basically, they're able to reach fulfillment because they're putting in the effort in the right place. Satisfaction is the key drive that ENTPs need to fulfill out of life in order to gain fulfillment out of life. You don't have to say yes to every possible opportunity. There are more than one path to fulfillment. In the end, fulfillment, you'll have the most striking questions to ask. What others are wondering, what a mystery, and other people end up wondering what mystery lies beneath that cold exterior. And though you'll know what you value because you've tested every idea and principle for success out there, right? Verifying your own anecdotal evidence, your own life experience, and finding out what is actually true helps you attain introverted feeling mastery, basically. It's through that process of verification. I mean, this is why the Socratic method is the absolute best method for communicating ideas with other people, because it's literally a consistent process of verification. It's over verifying all the time, and running entirely away from assumption and presumption. And presumption is the bane of the ENTP existence, essentially. But letting go of presumption, right, entirely, and not assuming anything. And ENTPs oscillate between those extremes where they will presume everything and assume anything versus never presuming and never assuming, right? And that's the Socratic method. I recommend any ENTP who watches this lecture, you read Ward Farnsworth's book, Socratic. Special thanks to the ENTP and the Ego Hacker community who brought that book to me. It may be Mr. Wright. I just don't remember. I think it actually was Mr. Wright, so thank you, Mr. Wright, for that. The principles from that book was exquisite. And the thing is, the mystery that lies beneath the cold exterior, that is your introverted sensing. It is your life experience. It is your anecdotes. But does it have any value, FI Trickster? Well, you don't know if it has value until it's verified, until you actually try to recreate those anecdotes. And if you can recreate them, then you're able to, then it's valuable, basically. And then you can start building principles around them. That's literally the path to introverted feeling mastery, from that point of view. It's entirely important. So anyway, sexuality, nurture, and nature remain the tiers of social engagement. Sexuality trumps nurture and nature despite development. A mature parent function remains socially conscious in how it can contribute to others. A mature parent prioritizes balance too. Introverted parents learn to focus externally, and extroverted parents learn to focus internally. Moving from teenager to parent means skillful balance in how we apply our parent, but a mature parent remains sacrificial and utilitarian towards others. The TI parent's development does not happen in isolation. The development of all of our functions is vital for achieving social value and success. See Ego Hacking Your Fear for more on that. And if you haven't done the Ego Hacking Your Fear yet, guys, what the hell you're doing? EgoHackingYourFear.com. It's the most important course we've ever produced in terms of personal growth and development for cognition for people. So anyway, folks, that's it for this episode. The fundamentals of developing and cultivating social skills for an ENTP archetype. If you found this lecture useful, helpful, educational, enlightening, please leave a comment so that we can check those out. So anyway, folks, thanks for watching and listening, and I'll see you guys on the next episode tomorrow.